It's always interesting to hear what some of the technologies are that are out there. We've focused, I think, very keenly through USGS, through Department of Energy. Our legislation really is focusing on the issue of accessing these critical minerals, recognizing that we've got a vulnerability, but I think it is equally important to talk about the ways that we can, through different technologies, whether it is recycling or looking for those alternatives, recognizing that we may have more than even we think we do. I want to go back to you, Secretary Baylash, with regards to the mapping initiative. I've always felt that we are not doing ourselves any favors when we don't know what it is that we have within our inventory of our public lands and certainly within our resources. So you had mentioned the mapping. I understand that the President, well, we know that he's requested funding to topographically, geographically, and geophysically map the country. This is the Earth MRI. We included some funding last appropriation cycle to support this. Where are we within USGS's effort to implement the program? What's the status of this?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Madam Chair. The Earth MRI program, as you noted, is contained. There's a budget request in the FY20 request from the department. The service has been working through and with multiple state surveys as well to identify those opportunities for partnerships, and then again with third parties.
Let me ask you on that. Do most states have they conducted their own inventories or their own mapping so that we can compile this into one resource, or are we still shy of real information?
I think that the situation varies from state to state and the maturity of their information, and also the amount of physical area that they have to assess. Our home state, for example, there is a great deal of work left to do to complete the mapping there. But in some places you have a better understanding and able to put that information together more rapidly than in others.
So we are still a ways behind in really understanding what our true inventory is as a nation when it comes to our critical minerals and our rare earths.
That's absolutely correct, particularly when you consider the advances in remote sensing that are available today as compared to even 30 years ago. So in terms of having a modern and comprehensive assessment, I think as a nation we have quite a ways to go.
So with regards to the Mineral Security Act that we have introduced, you've all had an opportunity to review it. You've all said some relatively kind things about it. Does it do enough? One of the things that I'm very aware of is that oftentimes by the time we get around to passing legislation, it's already a little bit stale. Are we forward-thinking enough with the legislation that we have laid down here? And I'll throw that out to all of you. Dr. Warner?
Yes, I would like to recommend, I think that some of the lithium-ion battery materials are definitely an area of concern. As we look at things like cobalt and lithium, the supply of those is in very high demand, and with the growth of lithium-ion chemistry, I think continuing to add to those materials, the lithium, nickel, manganese, and cobalts, expanding to make sure that those are included and covered, those could be very strategic resources. And they're going to be key to the current generation of technologies, as well as the next generation of technologies for energy storage moving forward. As we think of beyond lithium, some of these other materials are going to get us into some of the lanthanums and some of the other lanthides that are going to move forward.
Okay, anything else? Dr. Zimkowicz and then Mr. Evans.
Yes, thanks, Senator Murkowski.
One of the things that we've noticed is that as soon as we mention to a landowner that the acid mine drainage sludge on their property may have value, it goes from being how fast can DEP get it off my site, to this is my stuff and no one's going to touch it. So the whole issue of ownership and control is really important to nail down in some sort of federal guidance, because right now it's a free-for-all and it'll be handled on it'll be like coal bed methane, if you're familiar with that controversy. It'll drag on forever. So resolution on that count, I think, would be very useful to include in a bill.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Evans?
I think that the permitting is going to help out a lot. I think the tracking and the KPIs that you had mentioned, the details of the bill are going to be important. We've seen when you get to the federal level at the BLM, resourcing is a challenge to get permitting through on timelines. They're going to be competitive to develop projects. I think the workforce development is excellent. If you look at our university and technical college programs, it's not focused around a lot of these technologies, and I think it's really important, even with some of the technology you've talked about in rare earth. The one thing I did mention around credit facilities and loan guarantees is something would be a next step that I think would be important to consider as our competitors, offshore governments help push development through their agencies and even with helping their own companies. And it's not something that we have done in this country in a long time, but we need a strategy around that because we're a decade or two behind foreign governments in that strategy.